I told you that my very favorite home cheese making recipe is the one for sour cream or creme fraiche. But the truth is I have a second favorite home cheese making recipe. And that one is for what I call farmer's cheese. It's going to come out almost identical to what you might know as fromage blanc. And some people will identify it more as pot cheese or baker's cheese. This recipe is a very general one, meaning you don't have to get very worried about a specific temperature or a specific amount of time. It uses really common home, easily available home ingredients, such as as in just some milk and some cultured buttermilk and some salt. It takes about 24 to 36 hours to finish, so not that long. You can plan a little bit ahead and have some homemade cheese at a dinner party or to give to a friend as a present. So it's really versatile, it's flexible, it's easy, it's inexpensive, it's fun, it's universal. It makes a fresh cheese that a lot of people will identify with and probably have ideas for how to bake with it or how to serve it. So that's why I love this cheese. Its simplicity, its adaptability. I'm going to tell you how to make it. I start with a gallon of milk. As I keep saying, the nicer the milk you buy, the more flavorful your cheese is going to be. So use this opportunity and buy some local milk. Buy some milk that comes from a dairy where the cows are on grass or the goats are on grass. Buy organic if you can. Buy a full fat milk, a whole milk, or 2%. This recipe is so flexible. Either the lower fat or the full fat are both going to be delicious, although I might argue that the full fat is going to be a little more delicious. But yeah, extremely flexible, easy to make recipe. This is the recipe if you don't make any of the other recipes in these videos. This is the recipe you have to make, promise me. Okay, take your gallon of milk, warm it up to room temperature. That's about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I warm my milk up to room temperature by either pouring it in a pot and warming it up on the stove. I also do the lazy girl method of just putting it in the sink and letting it warm up while I finish up the dishes, making sure that the lid has not been opened yet so that dishwater doesn't get in your milk. I also can leave it out at room temperature for about an hour and it will come to room temperature. When your milk is at room temperature, check it with your thermometer that you trust because you checked it in a glass of ice water. Looking good. We're at room temperature. And now I'm going to add cultured buttermilk. The important thing to remember is that the buttermilk should be fresh and that it should be cultured. So this is not buttermilk as in some vinegar that was poured into milk. This is cultured buttermilk, and I can open it up and I can smell that fermented, yogurty, delicious sour milk smell. To the gallon, I just want to let you know this is a wonderful, flexible recipe. I'm measuring it so that you have a sense of how much buttermilk I'm adding, but the truth is that when I'm doing this in the privacy of my own home, I don't even measure. I just add a splash or two of buttermilk to the gallon, and away we go. So I'm going to do 3 tablespoons of buttermilk here. You can choose, as I said, if you wanted to heat this up on a pot on the stove, you don't have to culture it in the container. If you want to avoid plastic, or you think that the plastic might lend its flavor to the milk, put it in a glass jar, put it in a mason jar, whatever works for you. After I've added the buttermilk to the milk, I just gently, not too vigorously, I gently shake it in. And now I do my fabulous trick of letting it sit there for about 24 hours. So we are returning now to our farmer's cheese recipe. This is, again, an excellent, easy cheese that I think you're gonna make. It's that easy. Yesterday, we took this gallon of milk that was room temperature and we added buttermilk to it to start the fermentation process, to start the breakdown of the lactose in the milk by the bacteria in the cultured buttermilk. Roughly 20 hours later, I'm coming back to this gallon and I'm noticing it's looking different. There are a couple things I can notice. One is it's a little subtle, so you might not be able to see. There's sort of a irregularity on the side. I can see it's not just solid milk. And if I shake it slightly, shake the gallon slightly, it doesn't look like it's liquid anymore. So I'm seeing some bubbles and some chunks. It's not looking liquid. And there's another clue I'm catching. Up at the top, I'm seeing kind of clearish fluid. That's the whey. So definitely fermentation happened. And I'm excited because that's what I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and check one more thing, which is how does this fermented milk smell? Because I want it to smell sort of sour in order to make the farmer's cheese. If you come to your gallon of milk after 10 to 24 hours and it just smells like milk, that would tell me that the buttermilk that I added wasn't living, didn't have active living cultures in it. It wasn't good buttermilk. I would repeat the recipe and use a different brand of buttermilk. Okay, so let me take a sniff. Wow, well, first of all, this looks different. The volume has obviously expanded because right here at the surface, there's the whey. So all these little bubbles that I'm seeing, that's some gas production and it's definitely expanded a bit. That's good. The next, oh yeah, smelling it, we are there. So this is really a gallon of buttermilk. What I've done as an intermediate step to making my farmer's cheese is I've taken a gallon of milk and turned it into buttermilk. So what I'm also telling you is if you wanted to take a little shortcut on this recipe, you could not make your own buttermilk. You could just go to the store and buy a gallon worth of buttermilk and go from that point forward. I like to make my own because this recipe gives me a chance to use up milk that I might have extra in the house. If you have a cow and you can't quite keep on top of all the milk that you need to drink, that you should be drinking, turn some of it into buttermilk in order to turn it into cheese. I also like to make my own buttermilk because I know that the enzymatic processes, all the bacteria that are digesting that milk, are extra fresh. It's a living product, a living food. So to me, that's exciting because it means more flavor and probably more health benefits. Okay, confirm that this milk is properly fermented based on the change in the texture of the milk, no longer milk, now curds and whey. Also based on the fact that it smells different and that it's puffed up just a little bit. All that's spot on. My next step, whoa, it's gonna spill over. Let me figure out what to do. I'll just pour some into here. That's just a little bit of the whey from the top. Because as you can see, well, it's just separated out. It's just looking different. It's not looking like milk. Here's the fun part. I'm gonna now get this into this pot. It's gonna be a little bit funny because that's a narrow neck and that's a lot of chunky cheese curd. If you wanted to, an easy way to not have to squeeze the curds out of the bottle would be to just ferment the milk in the pot that you're gonna use itself. I often use the container of milk that the milk came in just because it's an easy, quick method that I don't have to think too much about. But certainly the day before, I could have poured this milk into the pot, warmed it up to room temperature, added the buttermilk, covered it up, and set it aside. On that note, I'd also say that I haven't talked much about what type of pot to use when making cheese. I highly advocate that you choose a stainless steel pot or an enamel pot, such as this one or this one. You shouldn't use aluminum pots or copper pots because an acidic broth, an acidic substance sitting for 12, 24 hours in those other metal pots could cause some leaching, which wouldn't be healthy and wouldn't be safe. So stick to stainless steel and enamel. So here we go. I'm gonna go ahead and get these in. It's a little bit funny because the milk is definitely different. Watch out for splats. Oops. So if you come close, you're going to see how the milk, which I'm just going to start calling buttermilk because that's what it is at this point, is frothy, thick, beautiful. What I'm also telling you is now you know how to make your own buttermilk. This is not buttermilk as in traditional buttermilk, the byproduct of butter making, but this is buttermilk the same as you buy in the store in the buttermilk container. Okay, I just want you to take a look at this because it's so, well, it's so exciting to me. Can you see those bubbles? Yeah? And I'm just going to taste it so I can give you a little feedback. Mmm. Delicious. Actually, it's so good, you might not even want to make this stuff into cheese. It tastes like buttermilk, and you've probably never drunk a glass of buttermilk, but this is so good, you will start drinking glasses of buttermilk. It's slightly tangy, a little bit like the kefir, but a different flavor, more butter aroma. You know buttermilk. This is what it is. Mmm, it's really good. It's not too sour, sort of sweet. Honestly, this is like a wonderful way to have probiotic food in your diet. In fact, it tastes so good to me, I'm gonna get myself a little glass. You can drink buttermilk just like this, or you can sweeten it with honey. I have a honey bear on hand. And this might become your new breakfast ritual. A little bit of sweetener if you want, some freshly made, super probiotic buttermilk, and you are set for the day. I'm not pretending, it's really good. Okay, back to the cheese recipe. Here we are, our gallon of buttermilk, fresh buttermilk. I'm going to turn the heat on to medium. I set it at 4, like medium-low. Here's what my goal is. My goal is now to apply heat to the buttermilk. What's going to happen is the combination of acid, the acid formed from last night's fermentation, the acid plus the heat are going to cause the proteins to clump together. You might have a suspicion of this because you've maybe made ricotta before, and you know that when you get milk really hot and pour in a little bit of lemon juice or vinegar, it causes the proteins to coagulate, to precipitate out of the fluid. The same thing is going to happen with this farmer's cheese. The trick is that I want to stir it gently so that the heat is distributed. So I'm just going to, here and there, run my stir through the buttermilk, but I don't want to stir it rigorously. I don't want to whisk this broth as it's heating, and here's why. The proteins, as they want to start to connect together to form clumps, curds, the cheese, they're doing that in a fragile sort of way. So they're starting to connect. If I'm stirring really forcefully, it's not going to allow those proteins to connect. They're going to start to connect, but then they're going to fall back apart. So my goal as a cheesemaker of trying to separate the solids from the liquid or the water, the whey, is going to not be accomplished. I'm going to be trying to separate the curds and the whey, except that I'm going to be moving it too quickly. They're never going to actually separate. This buttermilk is now heating, and I want to stir it ever so slowly so that those proteins have a chance to link together. Look how slowly I'm stirring. The funny part is when I teach this cheese in some of my classes, I can kind of get a sense of where people are at and what kind of person they are by how they're stirring. Because for some people, it's very, very hard to stir very, very slowly. So this is your little slow it down challenge of cheese making. I'm lowering the heat because I'm starting to see that change pretty quickly. If you zoom on in, you can see that I'm starting to see like thickened chunks sort of forming like that. That's good, that's what I want. But I don't want it to happen too fast, so I'm slowing the heat down. I'm actually gonna turn the heat to low. And I'm gonna stop stirring every now and then. I've got my thermometer nearby. I wanna cook the pot up to 105 minimum, but usually I end up cooking this style of cheese up to about 120. That's a big temperature range, and it's really a choice for you, the cheesemaker, to make. If you want a very tender, high moisture farmer's cheese, something that's fluffy and that you would dollop on top of berries, high moisture, equivalent almost to yogurt, then you should cook this pot to the minimum temperature of 105. If you want something that's drier, that you could put into a cheesecloth and drain and press and then have it be dry and crumbly, almost like a dry queso fresco, then you should go ahead and cook it hotter and longer and stir it hotter and longer. So I was giving you the boundaries of 105 minimum, about 120 maximum, although truth be told, some people make this recipe and they cook it much higher, like 150. Why you would cook it to 150 is you get a very dry farmer's cheese. Why you would not cook it to 150 is that some people love this cheese because it is essentially a probiotic living food. It's not been pasteurized if you don't bring it up above about 130, 140. So if you're a home cheesemaker or you're making your own buttermilk and farmer's cheese or interested in doing that, because you want the health benefits, because you want to eat foods that are rich with enzymes, teeming with healthful probiotic bacteria, then cook it to the lower end. So 105 is still essentially like a raw cheese food. So let me check the temperature again, give it a stir, and see where we're going. 74. The funny thing is that I see the temperature jumping around quite a bit. So it says 74, 93, and the reason for that is that I'm not stirring too much on purpose. So the take-home message is this: you're not going to be able to have perfectly distributed heat throughout the vat, and that's okay. You're going to have some hot pockets and some cold pockets. Just do your best finding that balance between stirring enough but not too much. You can also notice, if you can see this, I'm still stirring slowly. I'm seeing the curds change quite a bit. I'm seeing this chunkiness and a little collection of whey pockets happening. That's just what I want. Can you see all that happening right there? Just gonna check the temperature again. We're about 10 degrees to go. Oops, hot pockets, cold pockets. I do want to say that in starting home cheese making, sometimes people get a little intimidated by what stuff they need, what's essential. Do they have to buy a press? Do they have to buy special equipment, a pH meter, thermometer? The answer is that, well, from my perspective, I think the most important thing to do is just start making cheese. And most beginning cheese making recipes, such as the ones you're learning here today, they can be done in the kitchen with stuff you already have, stuff you use for other purposes. You don't need to buy new stuff. And this cheese is a perfect example. I'm using my digital thermometer, which I love, but the truth is if you just pay attention to the video, you're gonna be able to make this cheese without even using a thermometer if you don't have one on hand. You can just make sure you're looking for that curding to happen, that thickening at the cheese at the top of the pot, and that's gonna tell you you're on track. Whether or not you're hitting 105, 115, 125, this is a really forgiving cheese, and you're gonna be fine within a wide range of temperatures. So get a thermometer if you don't have one, because it's fun to play with. If you don't have one, just jump right into this recipe. You're gonna figure out how much you love it and how excited you are to keep investing in future equipment. So here we are, just still seeing a little bit of change happening. The temperature is at low. Something that's amazing, and this reminds me of when I made ricotta with you in the other video, is, can you see this clarity? It's a little hard to see it, but see, it almost looks like there's water right there. It's like cheese floating around in water. See that? That's just what I want. That is so exciting to me because I'm starting to see it. Almost seems like it's hard to catch it, but it sort of seems like there's water in there, like little bits of cheese are floating around in this clearish broth. It's subtle, but that's telling me I'm doing exactly what I meant to do, which is separate the curds from the whey. Make it so that I can toss the watery portion of the milk. So my cheese making friends, this pot of cheese, of farmer's cheese, looks excellent. This is just what I want. The sort of clearish whey at the edges, the chunks, the smaller chunks and the bigger chunks of cheese, which have collected at the top of the vat. I'm going to do a temperature check. I'm sure I have hot and cold pockets, but that's okay. So this says 92, 101, 105. So I would say at this, we're in the cooler temperature range. Maybe I'll cook it just a tiny bit more. While I'm cooking it that last bit, I'll go ahead and set up my draining station. To drain the farmer's cheese, just a colander and a piece of cheesecloth, that's all you need. It definitely, it's a finely grained cheese, meaning you need a fine cheesecloth, you need those fine pores, that weave, so that when the cheese starts to drain, the little particles, because this has fairly fine little particles, don't run off and run into the whey to be discarded. So it's good to have a cheesecloth lining your colander. I'm going to go ahead and wet it because I always like to rinse and wet and clean my cheesecloth before I have the curds touch it. Okay, I just rinsed this cheesecloth. I like to always clean my cheesecloth before I use it. I'm gonna line the colander, and I'll do one last temperature check. It looks totally on track, meaning clearish broth, cheese particles clustered at the top. My final temperature read is 105. I'm going to turn off the heat, and I like to let the curds just sit in that hot whey, the same as I do when I make ricotta. Let it just sit for 5 to 10 minutes, do that last bit of cooking, then I'm going to go ahead and drain it into the pot. 10 minutes have passed, and the curds of my farmer's cheese recipe are ready to drain. You can see as I start to drain them that they are collected at the top of the vat, and they firmed up a little bit. Can you see that as I pull away? It's almost like they form their own little chunk. I can use my slotted spoon like this to bring them out of the pot, oops, and into my colander like this. But I find it's actually a tiny bit easier to just go ahead and, it's a tiny bit easier to just go ahead and scoop the whole thing. Only because it's, as I said, the grains are really fine. You can see they're just so tender. So if I just go like this, I know that I'm going to capture all of them. Remember, this is just 1 gallon of milk. Moving the curds from the pot into the colander with this enables me to treat them more gently. If I could, in theory, just pick up this pot and splash it through the colander, except that, as I said many times, the curds are really tender, and so if they receive a lot of friction, if they fall from a foot above the colander and smash into the colander, they're going to break into smaller bits, and I'm just going to lose more cheese into the whey. So I'm thinking about just treating them really gently, pouring them gently. Treat your cheese curds like you treat your beer, gently. There we go. Draining farmer's cheese. I'm going to let it go ahead and drain for as long as I want. I usually let it drain for 2 hours at room temperature and then put it in the fridge for a few hours. However, the less time you let it drain, the higher moisture the cheese will be. So if you would like a light, fluffy, high moisture cheese, you could drain this for as little as 30 minutes. If you want something extra firm and dense, almost like a spreadable cream cheese density, then let it drain longer, on the order of several hours to overnight. As I have maybe showed you before, an easy way to save on space and have your cheese continue to drain is to just take the corners of the cheesecloth and knot them together. Like this. And this little pouch of draining delight can hang, you could put a long spoon through this loop and suspend it over a large pot. A really funny way you could have this cheese drain is you could go and hook it on a branch of a tree outside. You don't have to worry about occupying your sink or taking up a huge amount of space in the refrigerator. I would say maybe don't let your cheese hang out outside of the fridge for more than about 5 hours if you want to have a longer shelf life. If you're going to be eating the cheese pretty soon, don't worry about it. Let it drain outside of the fridge for longer. So here we go. Draining starts. See you in a few hours. Here we are back with my drained farmer's cheese. I let this one drain extra long, 12 hours. And at one point towards the end, I even put a plate on top and a book, little heavy cookbook, so because I just wanted to press that last bit out. So you can get the cheese even drier than this, but this is an example of a drier draining of farmer's cheese. So I'm going to undo the knot and bask in the glory of homemade cheese goodness. Let's see if you can see this. Oops, maybe I'll just capsize it right into the bowl I have here. You can see that I've drained it enough that it's crumbly and it's not totally dry, but it's somewhat dry. It is, I would call that medium to dry. If I pick up a grain of it, a piece of it, and I crumble it with my hands, it wants to crumble, but there's still some moisture in there. So what I do from this point forward depends on what I want to use the farmer's cheese for. If I want to use it as a general topping for a piece of toast or baked potato, I would keep it just as is. The only thing I would do is I would add some salt. This is a good point in cheese making to pull out your fancy salts, whereas with other recipes, when you're adding pounds and pounds of salt to a brine, or when we were making the cheddar jack, we used cups of salt. Most of that salt is lost. In this case, the cheese is already drained, so adding a specialty salt, it's going to allow the salt to really sing and show itself. So if you want to pull out your truffle salt or your Himalayan pink salt, go for it. I add a small amount of salt as I can at first, mix it in and taste it. You can always go forward with salting, but it's a little hard to go backwards. I'm starting off with just a 1/4 teaspoon. I'm just going to mix it in. I'll give it a taste. It's so good. I didn't put a lot of salt, so it's barely salty. In fact, I probably should put some more in, but know that you don't have to oversalt this. This is an incredibly versatile cheese that you have now. You could keep it like this, loose pack it into containers, keep it in your fridge. You'll find 1,000 ways to add it to most dishes that you're making. On the other hand, if you want to spruce it up a little bit, I'll show you how to do that, how to make it fancy. I'm here with this finished farmer's cheese, which I've drained moderately, and I wanted to give you an idea of how you could use it if you've never used farmer's cheese or baker's cheese or pot cheese before. This, as I said, is a really versatile cheese. You can take it in the direction of sweet, you can take it in the direction of savory. It's not a cheese for aging, meaning you shouldn't plan to hold on to it for another month or two so it grows more complex. It's definitely a cheese to eat fresh, but you have a million options for how to do that. Now I'm going to show you an idea for sweetening it up, using it as something you might put on a brunch table or even use as a dessert cheese. Serve it with nice cookies you've just made. I took some of it. I can choose to increase the moisture or keep it as it is. For this example, I'm going to keep it as it is, but I'm going to mix it for a bit so that the texture becomes a little bit more homogeneous. I'm also going to add just a pinch more salt, and I'm also going to sweeten it up with some honey. Yes, that's fancy pink salt. Here's some ground cinnamon, about a shake or two. And my honey. You can just do this to taste. If you want a sweeter cheese, more honey, less sweet, less honey. This is my kids' favorite way to eat this cheese, sweetened up lightly and served with fresh fruit. I also like to add just a drop of vanilla to make it desserty if I'm serving it as a dessert cheese. Let me go ahead and taste it, see how sweet it is, if it needs a little more of anything. Oops. It tastes like cheesecake. It's got the aroma of cultured milk, of buttermilk, a little bit of the cinnamon, a little bit of the vanilla. Cheesecake. This is a gluten-free cheesecake. It's delicious. A gluten-free, egg-free cheesecake. I'm gonna go ahead and just pack it into a nicer display container. And for a final presentation, if I was bringing this to a party, I would go ahead and drizzle just a little bit more honey on the top. Makes it completely irresistible. If you wanted, you could stop right there. A pile of fresh, beautiful seasonal fruit, your cheesecake, your homemade cheesecake in the middle. You could also add in shortbread, cookies, or some nicely toasted nuts. This is a healthy, beautiful, homemade, protein-rich, delicious snack or dessert for you to eat or you to share with your friends. Be sure that If you are leaving it in the sink as a way to warm it up in a bath of warm dishwater, make sure it's truly closed. You don't obviously want those two to mix. So opening it up, I'm going to go ahead and check the temperature with my Trude thermometer to make sure we're really at room temperature.